The CIA, a mighty US organization, right? For better or worse, a force of global influence. Would you be surprised to hear that was the brainchild of a Canadian, a man of very humble beginnings, who rose to become a war hero and a secret player in the game of spies on the global stage, who played a critical part in the event that ended World War II and arguably started the Cold War. I give you William Bill Stephenson, aptly codenamed Intrepid, aka the Quiet Canadian. This is Spies and Ties, a series of World War II in real time, and I am Astrid Deinhard. Hello, darlings. We all know there are many people in our world with a challenging start in life, a disturbing upbringing, dangerous surroundings, insufficient education, illness, or just terrible political circumstances. William Stephenson, Bill, experienced all that, but rose to become one of the most powerful men in the Western Hemisphere during World War II, enjoying undisrupted trust from both British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Franklin Roosevelt. Not only did he build up a network of hundreds of agents spanning embassies, top US newspapers and film companies, and the office of high-profile businessmen, on the way there, he also became a self-made multimillionaire, more or less the honest way. It all begins in 1897, when Bill, born William Stanger, to an Icelandic mother and Scottish father, sees the sad light of day in Manitoba, Canada. Shortly after his birth, his father dies, and his destitute mother gives him up for adoption to a close friend, also from Iceland. He thus becomes the oldest of 4 children in the Stephenson family. He is a small, weak child, but quick-witted, ambitious, and has a perfect recollection photographic memory. His foster family is not much better off than his birth parents, and Bill leaves school at 12 to work all kinds of odd jobs. By age 16, he's a delivery boy for the Manitoba Telegraph newspaper and gets his first claim to fame. His perfect memory allows him to help the police catch a murderer. He spots on his rounds and recognizes from photos he glanced in the paper. Like so many young men of his generation in 1916, as World War I rages, he volunteers and goes to Europe with an expeditionary force. He is wounded several times, even by gas, and eventually sent back to England to recover. He wants to take up boxing classes to get fit again and go back into the war. But at 5'5", that's 165 centimeters, I think, and suffering his wounds, the army doesn't want him in the field anymore. And instead, he's sent to the Reserve Engineering Corps and ends up at an airfield. But Bill won't stay down, literally. He excels as an engineer and is promoted. But what he really wants is to join the Canadian Royal Flying Corps and to be a pilot. So he learns how to fly, studies flying theory, mechanics, navigation, and significant for his future, wireless communication. In 1917, he gets accepted as a pilot and goes back to the continent, where he quickly becomes a flying ace with 12 victories to his name. But in July 1918, he himself is shot down and taken prisoner by the Germans. And this is where things take another unexpected turn upwards for our Bill. At Holzminden POW camp, he works in the kitchen. There he sees a can opener for the very first time, a revolutionary German invention. You see, Until then, cans had mostly been opened by force with a knife. In October, he escapes, but before he goes, he pinches one of those can openers. Now, the German Imperial Army has no patent for the opener outside Germany, and back in England and then Canada, Bill patents the little device. Simply put, it sells like hotcakes, and Bill has laid down the foundation of a very successful business career. So, in 1922, he moves from Canada to England and starts investing his money in companies that work on research and manufacturing of radios. Soon, his business ventures span wireless technologies, a cement company, and a film production company. Together with a secret high society friend in England, he develops new radios and wireless technology, experiments with X-ray, and even successfully transmits photos by wireless. So, ventures into steel and aircraft manufacturing brings him back to Germany in the 1930s. Now, as a businessman, here he sees firsthand how the rise of Hitler poses a great threat to a new war in Britain and the rest of Europe. Meanwhile, the British government is focused on appeasing and containing Hitler. The Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, commonly known as MI6, does possess some information on Germany's armament programs. Reports largely ignored or dismissed. Britain's war industry is outdated and rearmament is very unpopular. For Bill, this is both a good business opportunity and a chance to help out his new home country. So, he continues to travel to Germany, posing as an admirer of the Nazi Third Reich. He gets close access to the Nazi military leadership and witnesses the huge scale of their growing war machine. Through Bill's upper-class British society connections, this information makes its way to Churchill himself in 1936, then just a member of parliament who used it to try to warn off the threat of war. The quality and the trustworthiness of Bill's information rivals the intelligence of SIS, and soon his mysterious upper-class friend introduced him to Stuart Menzies, the very head of SIS. Now, surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprising, at this point, mentions of William Stephenson's past start to disappear from the public record. Company records that have his name on them are either taken into government files or completely redacted. Poof, wiped out. While he gets more and more involved with espionage. Involved, but not involved enough, it seems. Bill sees that Hitler is the main problem and proposes that he be assassinated. Get rid of the problem. With his access to German high command, Bill thinks he could get in and could shoot Hitler with a sniper rifle during one of his rallies. If he is right, is never proven, since the idea is unfortunately dismissed because Downing Street still thinks it's possible to negotiate with Hitler. Well, we all know you can't do business with Hitler, and war does follow. So, at this point, President Franklin Roosevelt becomes increasingly worried about the lack of a proper US intelligence network and any structure for intelligence activities. As we have seen many times before, US military intelligence is at best fragmented, to not say not existent. So, in private correspondence FDR asked Winston Churchill for help to establish an intelligence agency. Now, Churchill's advisors point out that the perfect man for the job would be, you guess it, William Stephenson. And Churchill agrees. You are to be my personal representative in the United States. I will ensure that you have the full support of all the resources at my command. In June 1940, Bill is sent to America to run the British Security Coordination, which is called BSC, a British-led intelligence agency meant to help fast-track the Americans to start their own. Through a friend, he sets up a private and most certainly secret meeting with J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. The US is still neutral at this point, so any cooperation between Hoover and Stephenson is strictly hush-hush. In any case, with Roosevelt's direct help and Hoover on board, Bill sets up a cooperation and intelligence exchange between the FBI in Washington and SIS in London. Bill has two stated goals: to expand the intelligence reach of the British intelligence service and, secondly, to get America into joining the war. One of the first tasks he sets is how to get as much supplies from the US for Britain without breaking America's neutrality. For this, he contacts his old friend Bill Donovan, a lawyer he had already worked with, an informal emissary to Britain to assess Britain's fighting capability. So, Bill and Bill turn out to be a perfect duo. After Donovan's brief and unofficial visit to England in 1940, he starts a campaign advocating for more aid for Britain and hammering home warnings about the Nazi threat to the US. So, it's really Bill and Bill who managed to get the first major armament deals secured. And Stephenson's messages Churchill that Britain will receive destroyers and over 1 million rifles. By now, Stephenson is expanding and has set up with BSC in the Rockefeller Center, New York. His next operation aims to suppress anti-war feelings among the Americans. There are a lot of German Americans who want America to stay out of the war. While they are not great in number, they do have money to devote to their cause. Of course, a lot of this is funded by Nazi Germany and fueled by Nazi propaganda to keep the US out of the war. Stephenson counters by using his media contacts to mount a concerted attack on anti-war agitators as fifth columnist. So, journalists from the biggest New York newspapers and radio issue sympathetic articles and programs about the British war effort gently encourage Americans to support entry into the war. He even starts harassing some radical isolationists by painting them as Nazi collaborators. Meanwhile, the efforts to create a proper US intelligence organization continue. Stephenson's deputy, Dick Alice, here he is, has drafted a proposal for the new organization. Based on that, in July 1941, FDR creates the Office of the Coordinator of Information, that is the OCI. The choice of leader is obvious. It's Bill Donovan. The agency rapidly develops with massive assistance from Stephenson and BSC, who organized the first spy school in America for new OCI recruits. The OCI and BSC now use their shared contacts to further expand their zones of operation. That includes the establishment of the British headquarters of OCI in London, all in complete secrecy and sometimes without British officials' knowledge. So, by the middle of 1942, intelligence exchange and cooperation is close to seamless, although operational differences are growing. At this point, OCI is reorganized as the Office of Strategic Services, that's the OSS, for espionage and sabotage, and the Office of War Information for propaganda. Donovan takes charge of OSS. I've covered that and their activities in several other videos, so have a look at it. But to make a long story short, the OSS together with SIS and the Special Operations Executive in Britain play an essential role in the war, and eventually the OSS will become the CIA. So, But what about Bill Stephenson, and how come he was so essential in all of this? Well, Stephenson enjoyed full trust both from Churchill and Roosevelt. His high-quality intelligence before the war made him a valuable asset for Churchill, and his effective and generous help with setting up American intelligence services brought him a great deal of support from the US president. Besides, the trust the Americans had towards Stephenson was partly based on the fact that he was a Canadian. They thought him to be an independent player who had in his interest the security of Canada first. Then, there's the money thing. The British government didn't see the BSC as a top priority, and funding was very poor. But Stephenson was aware that he needed hundreds of high-quality employees, and to keep them happy and proud and compensated properly, so he decided to simply cover the costs himself. It is estimated that it cost him about $3 million. In today's money, around $42 million himself, out of his pocket. In any case, by the end of 1942, Bill Stephenson is not just responsible for the US, he is in charge of the entire Western Hemisphere. His organization collects information about anything and anyone of importance, and they are not too shy to use sometimes rather questionable tactics, like finding compromising information on people they could help them to blackmail them later. They penetrated the Japanese, Mexican, and Colombian embassies and prevented German-led coup in Bolivia. Bill oversees the building of the Camp X training center, which is used to train both the BSC agents and Donovan's people. He monitors the flow of money, people, mail, and supplies both in and out of Europe. He is in charge of the massive interception system, all transatlantic mails from the US bound for Europe. The US and the Far East are intercepted and analyzed by 1,200 censors of the British Imperial Censorship in Bermuda before being routed to their destination without any indication that they have been read. In the US, the BSC is so secret, it has grown so much that it starts to be seen by some as even a danger to the people involved. Nobody except Donovan and Roosevelt actually know about Stephenson, his position, and his agenda. A few people outside that inner circle start suspecting that BSC and Stephenson, listed as the Director of Security Coordination, are actually conducting espionage on behalf of the British rather than helping the US. The Assistant Secretary of State even brings this suspicion to Roosevelt, fully unaware that the president is one of its architects. I would have loved to see FDR's face right then, right? The scale of BSC and the uncertain legality of their actions is now prompting some of the US higher-ups to try and tone down their activity. FBI's Hoover is among them, and in one of the meetings with anti-BSC conspirators, he claims to never have fully known what the BSC was doing, and that he felt like Bill Stephenson is lying to the FBI about every information that he has passed over, and that there isn't a close relationship between the FBI and the BSC, and while Stephenson is in charge, or at least while he is running it in the manner that he is, it is highly unlikely that there ever would be. But the sheer amount of work that the BSC has done finally let even his opponents recognize the positive influence he has on the US intelligence service. Stephenson has been a huge part of the success of the OCI and the Office of Strategic Services. Without Bill, neither of them would have been fit for purpose in time to have had any positive impact on the war. His last mission takes place in September 1945, when the war will just have ended. He finds out that a cipher clerk at the Soviet embassy in Canada, Igor Guzhenko, is working for the Soviet military intelligence. The spy network the Soviet Union is trying to create is meant to build an advantage over Canada as soon as any weakness is shown. But Guzhenko feels that this would be a stab in the back of Canada, which had been helping the Soviet Union extensively during the war. He makes the mistake of speaking up to the Kremlin and is ordered to get back to the Soviet Union with his wife. Stephenson interferes and makes sure that the Guzhenko family is taken into protective custody and later moves them to Camp X. After a thorough questioning, Guzhenko reveals that the Soviets have created a vast espionage network in the US and in Canada. While this information leads to the capture of some of the Soviet spies and is a massive help in deciphering coded messages, Guzhenko's defection is also thought by some to be the official start of the Cold War. So, finally, Stephenson has helped SIS to enter World War II with at least some awareness of the enemy, co-created the CIA, and fired the first virtual shot in a global war of espionage that will continue for almost 5 decades. After that, he will retire from espionage deservedly, I would say, and he will move to Bermuda. At first, he will take up residence in the Princess Hotel, where the Imperial Censorship Bureau had been housed, to then buy his own home, the Goldeneye Estate, where he will pass away peacefully aged 92 in January 1989, just a month before the end of the Cold War. As his story comes to light in his later years, and when the secrecy is lifted after his death, he will receive honors in Great Britain, the US, and his homeland, Canada. What an amazing little man he was. If you want to learn more about Wild Bill Donovan and the operative part of the creation of the OSS, click here. And it's our not-so-secret army, the Time Ghost army that keeps our information network going. Join us at timeghost.tv or patreon.com, and I will see you next time.